April 8, 1943. The chill of high altitude clawed at the edges of Oberleutnant Ralph Herrmann's vision, turning his breath into fleeting clouds inside the cramped cockpit of his Focke-Wulf FW-190A5. At 27,000 feet over the patchwork fields of northern France, the world below was a distant blur of greens and browns, scarred by the endless churn of war. Herrmann, a battle-hardened ace with JG-26, the Abbeville Boys as they were known, adjusted his oxygen mask and let his eyes lock onto the intruders climbing into his domain. 16 Republic P-47C Thunderbolts from the U.S. Army Air Force's 4th Fighter Group lumbered upward in a tight box formation, their engines a distant thunder that vibrated through the thin air. Herrmann's lips curled into a smirk beneath his scarf. He danced with the best. The razor-sharp Spitfires over the English Channel, the tenacious Yaks on the frozen steppes of the Eastern Front. Those had been worthy foes, sleek and deadly. But this was a farce. "Ach, the Americans send us their flying beer barrels," he crackled over the radio to his wingman, Lieutenant Fritz Losigkeit, whose FW-190 shadowed him like a faithful hound. Laughter rippled through the squadron channel, a rare spark of levity in the grinding attrition of the air war. The P-47s looked absurd, barrel-chested fuselages topped with oversized greenhouse canopies, stubby wings that seemed barely adequate for the 7-ton behemoths they supported, and those massive 4-bladed propellers churning like oversized fans. To the Luftwaffe pilots, schooled in the art of the agile dogfight, these machines evoked images of bloated zeppelins trying to impersonate fighters. Down in the lead Thunderbolt, Major Donald J. M. Blakesley gripped the control column with steady hands, his jaw set against the vibration rattling through the cockpit. At 30 years old, Blakesley was no green recruit. He'd flown Spitfires with the RAF's Eagle squadrons before the U.S. entered the fray, racking up kills that made him a legend among the Yanks now flooding into England. His leather flight jacket, scarred from a dozen scrapes, creaked as he scanned the sky. The P-47 was his new mount, assigned to the 334th Fighter Squadron of the 4th Group, and he knew the German eyes were on them. "Stay tight, boys," he barked into his throat mic, his voice calm but edged with the gravel of a man who'd seen too many friends spiral into the sea. "They're up there, waiting to pick us off like ducks on a pond." The Thunderbolts were making their combat debut in Europe that spring, ferrying bombers across the Channel on escort missions. But today, with clear skies and a whisper of intel about prowling FW-190s, Blakesley had pushed for a deeper sweep. The big radials, Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasps, each packing 2,000 horsepower, howled in protest as the planes clawed for altitude. They were slow climbers, these jugs, as the pilots were starting to call them, a nickname born of their juggernaut-like bulk. At low levels, they could outrun a locomotive. Up high, they wallowed like reluctant whales. Blakesley felt every ounce of that weight in the sluggish response of his stick. But he trusted the bird. It was built like a tank, armored belly and all, designed not for graceful turns, but for survival and straight-line brutality. Herrmann's squadron circled lazily, conserving fuel while assessing the threat. From their vantage, the Americans' formation was a textbook blunder. Rigid, predictable, offering easy angles for a dive. "They fly like they're still stateside, drilling for show," Losigkeit quipped, his tone laced with the arrogance of a service that had ruled the skies since 1939. The Luftwaffe had honed its tactics in the blitzkrieg skies, emphasizing hit-and-run ambushes, superior climb rates, and the deadly bounce from altitude. The FU-190, with its radial engine and clipped wings, was a masterpiece of that philosophy. Compact, powerful, turning on a dime. These Yankee contraptions, they mocked the very essence of air combat. As the P-47s topped out at 25,000 feet, Herrmann signaled the attack. 16 FW-190s peeled off in pairs, diving like falcons on the slower climbers. The sky erupted in tracer fire, bright red lines stitching the air. Blakesley's wingman, Captain Jack McLaughlin, jinked hard as rounds pinged off his armor plate. "Bandits at 3 o'clock high!" McLaughlin yelled, banking to evade. The Germans struck fast. A burst from Losigkeit's cannons shredded a P-47's canopy, sending it into a flat spin toward the earth. Another Yank, Lieutenant Don Botchke, felt his engine cough under the strain, but the Jug's rugged frame absorbed the hits that would have eviscerated a lighter fighter. Blakesley twisted into the fray, his heart pounding with the familiar rush. He spotted Herrmann's bird, a silver dart with black crosses, lining up on a straggler. "Brake left!" Blakesley commanded, throttling up. The P-47's nose heavy, he hauled back on the stick, forcing the beast into a lumbering turn. It wasn't pretty, but it bought time. Herrmann overshot, cursing as the Americans' bulk refused to yield. In the chaos, Blakesley squeezed the trigger. 850 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing, barked in unison. A storm of lead that converged on the FW-190's tail. Rounds tore through the elevator, and Herman's plane shuddered, smoke trailing from the engine cowling. The Oberleutnant broke off, nursing his wounded bird homeward. Below, the dogfight dissolved into a swirling melee. 2 more P-47s fell, their pilots bailing out over friendly lines, but the Germans paid dearly. 3 FW-190s littered the French countryside, victims of the Thunderbolt's sheer firepower. As the survivors disengaged, Herman's radio crackled with disbelief. What sorcery is this? Those barrels pack a wallop. Laughter had turned to grim respect. The Yanks had lost 3 planes, the Luftwaffe 4. On paper, a German victory. But in the cockpits, the pilots knew. The Jug had drawn first blood, and it wouldn't be the last. Back at Debden Airfield in Essex, England, that evening, Blakesley debriefed his squadron in the dim glow of the ops room. Cigarette smoke hung heavy, mingling with the scent of oil and unwashed flight suits. They came at us like wolves, he said, sketching arcs on a greaseboard. But we gave better than we got. The pilots nodded, nursing bruises and bandaged hands. The P-47 had proven resilient, its self-sealing tanks and thick plating shrugging off hits that would doom a Mustang or a Spit. Yet doubts lingered. "She's a brute, Don," McLaughlin admitted, rubbing his neck. "Climbs like a loaded freight car. If they get the drop on us again," Blakesley waved it off. He knew the plane's architect, Alexander Kartveli, the Georgian immigrant who'd dreamed up the XP-47B prototype back in 1940. Kartveli had scoffed at elegance, calling his creation a dinosaur built for the Stone Age of aerial warfare. No fragile monocoque here, just riveted aluminum slabs, a fuselage wide enough to swallow a man whole, and that turbo-supercharged engine that turned the Jug into a high-altitude monster. The R-2800 wasn't just powerful. It was a beast fed by exhaust-driven turbines, shoving 2,300 horsepower into the sky above 30,000 feet. Kartveli had bet on brute force over finesse, and on April 8th it had paid off. Word of the skirmish spread quickly through the Luftwaffe's intelligence channels. In a briefing room at a Luftwaffe base near Lille, Major Joseph Pips Priller, commander of JG-26 and Herman's boss, pored over reconnaissance photos. Priller, a stocky veteran with a reputation for bluntness, jabbed a finger at the grainy images of the P-47s. "These are no Spitfires," he growled to his staff. "Fat, slow, and begging for a bullet. But Herman says they bite back," the room murmured. The Luftwaffe was stretched thin by 1943. Losses mounting from the Eastern Front, fuel rationed to a trickle, and now these American interlopers joining the RAF in escorting heavies over the Reich. Priller leaned back, lighting a cigarette. He'd tangled with the best, scoring 68 kills since Poland. But the war's math was shifting. The Allies' factories churned out planes like sausages. The Reich's assembly lines sputtered under bombs. "Mock them if you must," he told his pilots later. "But respect the guns. 8 Brownings per wing. That's 425 rounds a minute per gun, cycling at 800 RPM. A 3-second burst, and you've hosed 1/200 rounds. Enough to turn our birds into sieves." Across the channel, in the Republic Aviation Plant on Long Island, New York, Alexander Kartveli reviewed fresh blueprints under the harsh fluorescence. The son of a Russian noble, he'd fled the Bolsheviks in 1922, landing in America with little more than sketches and dreams. Farmingdale's hangars echoed with the din of rivet guns as workers assembled the next batch of P-47Ds. Improved models with bubble canopies for better visibility and drop tanks for extended range. Kartveli paced, his mind replaying the design debates. "They called it ugly," he muttered to his chief engineer, a lanky Iowan named Bill McCormick. "A flying bathtub, but ugliness wins wars." McCormick nodded, tapping the spec sheet. The Jug weighed 4,500 pounds empty, ballooning to 8,000 fully loaded, twice the heft of a Bf-109. Its wings spanned 40 feet, housing not just the guns but 200 gallons of fuel in that labyrinthine turbo system, a Rube Goldberg contraption of intercoolers and wastegates that kept the engine breathing rarefied air. Test flights had been brutal. The prototype's first hop in May 1941 ended in a wheels-up landing after the canopy blew off mid-air. But Kartveli persisted, layering in armor, duplex steel plates around the cockpit, bulletproof glass forward. That made the P-47 the safest fighter in the sky. As night fell over Debden, Blakesley lay in his cot staring at the corrugated iron ceiling. The day's fight replayed in flashes, the whine of diving engines, the acrid tang of cordite, the The gut wrench of watching a buddy shoot bloomed too late. He'd claimed Herman's plane as a probable, but victories felt hollow now. The Luftwaffe wasn't beaten. They were adapting. Tomorrow's mission loomed. A bomber escort to Wilhelmshaven, deep into flak country. The P-47 would carry the load, but could it carry the war? In Berlin, Herman nursed a bandaged arm in a field hospital, dictating his report to a stenographer. "The American machine is crude," he said, wincing as the nurse tightened the sling. "It turns like a cow in mud, climbs like it's wearing chains. But the firepower, Gott im Himmel, it's a storm." The words hung in the air, a quiet omen. The laughter of April 8th would echo as irony in the months to come, as the jugs transformed from mocked oddities to the reapers of the Reich's air armada. Little did they know, the true reckoning was just warming its engines. The morning after the April 8th scrap dawned gray and sodden over Debden, with rain lashing the Nissen huts like a vengeful ghost. Major Don Blakesley rose before the bugle, his body aching from the G-forces of yesterday's tangle, and made his way to the hangar. The air reeked of avgas and wet canvas, and mechanics swarmed over the returning P-47s like ants on a carcass. Bullet holes pocked the aluminum skins, some superficial grazes, others deep gouges that spoke of near misses with 20mm shells. One jug, piloted by a shaken lieutenant from the 335th, had limped home with its tail assembly half shot away, the rudder hanging by threads of cable. Blakesley ran a calloused hand along the fuselage of his own bird, dubbed Hop-Along after a cartoon cowboy. The plane was a brute, no denying it. At rest, it squatted on its tricycle gear like a bullfrog ready to leap, its radial engine cowling flared wide to gulp air. "She's ugly as sin," Blakesley muttered to Captain Jack McLaughlin, who was overseeing a patch job on his wing. McLaughlin grunted in agreement, wiping grease from his brow. "But she took 3 hits from that 190 and kept flying. Try that in a Kitty Hawk." The pair shared a grim chuckle, but beneath it lay the unspoken truth. The P-47 was an enigma, a machine born of compromise and sheer Yankee audacity. To understand the jug's soul, one had to trace its veins back to the drafting tables of Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, New York. Alexander Kartveli, the wiry engineer with a perpetual squint from poring over blueprints, had conceived the XP-47B in the feverish summer of 1939. The world was tilting toward abyss, Poland fallen, France teetering, and the U.S. Army Air Corps demanded a fighter that could outlast the coming storm. Kartveli, drawing on lessons from the Great War's lumbering DH-4s, rejected the prevailing dogma of lightweight agility. "Speed is a whore," he'd once quipped to a colleague, "but survival is a wife." His design was a fortress, a massive airframe wrapping around the most potent piston engine America could forge, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. That engine was the jug's beating heart, a 18-cylinder radial monster displacing 2,800 cubic inches, hence the name. Twin rows of 9 cylinders each, air-cooled and turbocharged, it belched 2,000 horsepower at takeoff, swelling to 2,300 at altitude. But power like that demanded tricks. Kartveli installed a General Electric turbo-supercharger, a labyrinth of ducts and turbines buried behind the pilot. Exhaust gases from the cylinders spun a turbine wheel, which in turn drove a compressor to ram dense, pressurized air into the carburetor. It was alchemy. At sea level, the system idled like a sleepy dragon. Above 25,000 feet, it roared to life, feeding the Double Wasp oxygen in the stratosphere's thin soup. The result? The P-47 could cruise at 400 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, outpacing even the vaunted FW-190 in level flight up high. Yet the turbo was a temperamental beast. Early prototypes suffered turbo runaway, where the wastegate stuck open, overboosting the engine until cylinders burst like overripe fruit. Kartveli's team iterated furiously, adding intercoolers to chill the compressed air, oil coolers slung under the belly like pendulous udders. The fuselage grew to accommodate it all. 10 feet long, 4 feet wide at the cockpit, with a belly fairing that made the plane look perpetually pregnant. Weight ballooned, 4,540 pounds empty, 7,700 combat loaded, demanding wings beefed up to 40 feet across, elliptical for lift but stubby for roll rate. "It's not a dancer," Kartveli told testers after the first flight on May 6, 1941. "It's a hammer." It's a hammer. That inaugural hop had been a comedy of errors. The XP-47B, with test pilot Lowry Brabham at the controls, thundered down the runway at Farmingdale, its tail dragging until rotation. Airborne at last, Brabham marveled at the surge, climbing like a homesick angel to 6,500 feet in minutes. But then disaster. The canopy, A hastily fitted frameless affair blew off in the slipstream, filling the cockpit with 200 mph wind. Brabham, half-deafened and eyes streaming, nursed the beast back for a belly landing on the grass. No wheels-up crash. The Jug simply plopped down, its rugged underbelly shrugging off the slide. Kartveli, watching from the tower, lit a cigarette. See? Built to last. Word of the prototype's resilience reached Washington, where Army brass salivated. Contracts flowed, 171 P-47Bs by mid-1942, escalating to thousands as war clouds burst. But production was hell. Republic's lines choked on complexity. The turbo plumbing alone required 500 feet of custom tubing per plane. Workers, many women fresh from assembly lines, riveted day and night, but quality slipped. Engines arrived with faulty valves. Wings warped under rushed heat treatment. The 1st Squadron, the 56 Fighter Group at Farmingdale, took delivery in June 1942, only to ground half their fleet for mods. "It's a widowmaker until you tame it," griped one early pilot, Captain Francis Gabreski, during stateside training. Across the Atlantic, the teething pains echoed in the 4th Fighter Group's shakedown at Debden. Blakesley's men, a mix of Eagle Squadron veterans and fresh West Pointers, arrived in England that January 1943 with P-47Cs, slimmer siblings to the B model, sans belly tank but with the same turbo quirks. The English climate was unkind. Damp fogs fouled spark plugs, and the Jug's thirst, 100 gallons an hour at cruise, strained rationed fuel. Training flights over the Suffolk Fens turned deadly. On February 9th, a P-47 from the 334th spun in during a mock dogfight, killing the pilot when the canopy jammed. Another, 2 weeks later, suffered turbo failure mid-climb, plummeting from 20,000 feet into the North Sea. Blakesley tallied the losses, 5 planes and 3 pilots gone before they'd even crossed the channel. The mechanics toiled in blacked-out hangars, lit by hurricane lamps, patching what they could. "This bird's got more plumbing than a battleship," complained Sergeant Hank Kowalski, a Polish émigré with nimble fingers, as he wrestled a frozen wastegate actuator. The turbo's ducts iced over in the chill, starving the engine of boost. Solutions came piecemeal. Alcohol antifreeze lines, heated suits for pilots, and rigorous pre-flight checklists that stretched briefings to hours. Blakesley drilled his squadron relentlessly, formation flying at 300 feet to build muscle memory, gunnery runs on drogues towed by Blenheims. "The Jug won't dance," he'd bark during critiques, "but she'll take a punch and give 10 back. Learn her rhythm, or she'll bury you." In the Luftwaffe's mess halls, whispers of the American interloper grew. Oberleutnant Hermann, arm in a sling from his April brush, regaled fellow JG-26 pilots with tales over ersatz coffee. "It's no acrobat," he admitted, sketching the P-47's outline on a napkin. "Climbs like it's hauling bricks. Maybe 1/800 feet per minute, half our rate. But the guns! Achtung, the guns!" Each wing cradled 4 synchronized 50 caliber M2 Brownings, air-cooled and belt-fed, with 425 rounds per gun. Trigger pull unleashed 850 rounds a minute total, over 14 a second, converging at 250 yards to shred armor like paper. Hermann had felt it. A burst that chewed his tail to ribbons, the impacts like sledgehammers on tin. Major Priller, ever the pragmatist, pored over salvaged wreckage from a downed P-47 near Abbeville. The Hulk smoldered in a crater, its radial engine a twisted sculpture of fins and pistons. Technicians prodded the remains. Self-sealing tanks that blunted cannon fire, cockpit armor deflecting 7.92mm rounds, and that infernal turbo, intact, even after a 200-foot plummet. "They're building for attrition," Priller concluded in his report to Luftwaffe HQ. "Not finesse. Our 109s bleed out from a single hit. This thing soaks it up." The FW-190, for all its punch, was lighter, less than 9,000 pounds loaded, with only 2 20mm MG-151s and cowl guns totaling 500 rounds. Firepower favored the Jug, but maneuverability was the Reich's edge. "Bounce them high and hard," Priller instructed. "Never turn with the beast." Back at Republic, Kartveli refined his dinosaur. The P-47D variant, rolling off lines by spring 1943, shed the razorback spine for a bubble canopy, improving rearward vision and easing bailouts. Drop tanks extended range to 1,000 miles, turning escorts into deep penetration raiders. Ground tests revealed another quirk: the Jug's propensity for ground loops on landing, its narrow gear track biting into turf. Pilots learned to nurse it down with rudder alone, a skill that saved more skins than dogfighting. As May bloomed, Blakesley's group logged their first victory claim, a probable FW-190 over Ostend, courtesy of Lieutenant Boschke's steady trigger finger. But losses mounted. 2 more jugs to flak on a Rouen sweep, pilots walking away from flaming wrecks thanks to the plane's bones. The 4th group's tally stood at 14 sorties lost to 3 kills, a ledger that soured briefings. "We're meat on the table," McLaughlin vented one night in the officers' club, slamming down a pint. Blakesley, nursing a scotch, fixed him with steady eyes. "Not for long, Jack." The Reich stretched. "We're just warming up. Give her time. She'll sing." Far away, in a Berlin bunker, Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring reviewed production charts with a scowl. Allied bombers hammered the Ruhr. The Eastern Front devoured squadrons. The P-47 reports filtered in, resilient, voracious, multiplying like locusts. "Let the Amos have their iron cows," he sneered to his aides. "Our eagles will pluck them bare." But doubt crept in, a shadow on the map. The skies, once a Teutonic preserve, were filling with new predators. And in the hangars of Debden, as thunder rumbled anew, the Jug's true forge fire awaited, the crucible of unrelenting combat, where steel would bend or break. May 1943 arrived like a reluctant ally, the English spring unfolding in fits of sun and squall. At Debden, the 4th Fighter Group's dispersal huts buzzed with the low hum of preparation. Maps pinned to walls like flayed skins, plotting runs into the teeth of the Reich. Major Don Blakesley paced the ready room, his flight boots scuffing the linoleum, as ground crews wheeled out the P-47Cs under a sky bruised with clouds. The April skirmish had been a baptism, messy, costly, but it lit a fire. Losses stood at 14 planes to a handful of kills, yet the Jugs had survived where slimmer fighters would have shattered. "We're not here to dance," Blakesley told his pilots during the morning brief, his voice cutting through the haze of pipe smoke. "We're here to hammer. And the hammer's getting sharper. And the hammer's getting sharper." The training gauntlet that followed was unrelenting, a forge of sweat and simulated slaughter designed to weld man to machine. Dawn patrols began at 400, pilots stumbling from bunks to scarf down eggs and beans before climbing into cockpits chilled by night dew. The P-47 demanded respect, its controls heavy, the stick a tiller for a ship rather than a rapier for a fencer. Blakesley, drawing on his Eagle Squadron days, instituted Jug School. 2 weeks of relentless drills over the Wash, the North Sea's gray expanse a proving ground free of prying eyes. Formations first, the rigid V's of bomber escort giving way to fluid fingers 4, where wingmen shadowed leads like ghosts, ready to peel off at the first whiff of trouble. Gunnery was the true crucible. Towed targets, sleeves of orange silk billowing behind Martin marauders, danced on the wind, demanding leads calculated in feet per second. The P-47's gun sight, a basic N3A reflector, threw a glowing pipper onto the glass, but convergence was key. All 8 Brownings zeroed to stitch fire at 250 yards. "Fire short, you're wasting ammo," Blakesley drilled. "Fire long, you're blind." Pilots squeezed off bursts, the recoil shuddering the airframe like a kick from a mule. Lieutenant Don Botchke, the kid from Ohio with a gambler's grin, racked up scores, his tracers arcing like comets. But others faltered. The Jug's torque yawed it left on trigger pull, demanding right rudder to steady. One Greenhorn, a replacement from the 361st, hosed 200 rounds into the sea before finding the mark, earning a blistering from the major. "That's not shooting. That's praying." Engine management added another layer of peril. The R-2800 ran hot, its cylinders glowing cherry red under load, and the turbo's whine could turn to a scream if mismanaged. Blakesley's ops officer, Captain Oscar Perdomo, ran mock emergencies. Simulated oil leaks forcing dives to clear filters, or wastegate failures demanding feather-prop glides. "Feel the surge," Perdomo would radio mid-drill. "That's your cue to ease off." Fatal errors piled up in sims. Overboosting led to seized pistons, ignoring the manifold gauge, to blown heads. By mid-May, the group's accident rate dipped, only 1 spin-in, a mid-air from poor spacing, but the toll lingered. Families back home received telegrams wrapped in euphemisms. "Regret to inform, training accident." Across the channel, the Luftwaffe adapted with predatory grace. Major Joseph Priller's JG-26, bloodied but unbowed, refined their playbook around the Yankee intruder. Intelligence from downed pilots and photo recon painted the P-47 clear. A high-altitude slugger. Vulnerable low and slow. "Hit them on the climb," Priller ordered in staff calls at their Beauvais base, a chateau ringed by flak towers. "Dive from the sun, rake the formation, then run for the deck." His aces, Herman recovering, joined by hotshots like Walter Wally Mattoni, practiced in FW-190s over the Somme, stooging at mock bombers to hone the bounce. The 190's BMW 801 radial gave it teeth. a 20mm cannon in the hub, flanked by 2 more in the wings, plus Cal machine guns. Burst times were short, mere seconds, but devastating up close. Priller's briefings crackled with candor. "The Jug's armor laughs at our 7.92s, he'd say, puffing a Gauloise. Aim for engines, radiators, the works. And watch the return fire. Those .50s converge like a buzzsaw." Salvage teams had pieced together a crashed P-47 near Dieppe, marveling at its guts. Layered aluminum over framework. Not the monocoque fragility of their own birds. The self-sealing tanks, laced with rubber and glycol, blunted penetrations. The cockpit tub, 1/8-inch steel, turned fragments aside. "It's a flying safe," one tech muttered. JG-26's losses from April stung. 4 planes, 2 pilots, but they claimed 7 Yanks, inflating morale. Göring's directives urged aggression. "The Führer's eyes are on the West. Show these cowboys the fatherland's fury." The first waves of real adaptation crashed on May 13th, a escort mission to Antwerp's oil docks. 16 P-47s from the 4th, tanks topped with 200-octane Avgas, droned eastward at 20,000 feet, shepherding B-17s of the 303rd Bomb Group. Blakesley led the top cover, eyes straining against the glare off the cowling. "Eyes sharp, boys," he keyed. "Jerry's love a parade." Sure enough, at 1100 hours, dots materialized from the east. 24 BF-109Gs from JG-2, slashing down like thrown knives. The melee ignited over the Scheldt, tracers lacing the sky in a deadly web. Blakesley broke right, his Jug wallowing into the turn as 109s overshot. "Tally-ho, 3 bandits," Captain McLaughlin called, diving to cover a straggler. The Germans pounced textbook, high-speed passes, cannons flashing. One B-17 erupted in flames, gunners raking a 109's wing until it peeled away smoking. Blakesley lined up a G-model, its yellow nose a blur, and unleashed. The 50s thundered, deafening even over the engine roar, hosing 400 rounds in a 4-second storm. Hits marched up the fuselage. The 109's canopy starred, the pilot slumping as it corkscrewed earthward. "Splash one!" Blakesley whooped, but elation soured fast. Flak bloomed black around them, shells bursting close enough to rattle teeth. Below, the adaptation showed. P-47 pilots no longer froze. Bulge, trailing McLaughlin, anticipated the bounce, jinking low to force a 109 into his sights. His burst caught the enemy low on the climb-out, shredding the tail and sending it tumbling. But the Jugs bled too. A wingman from the 335th took a 20mm through the cooler, glycol streaming white before the engine seized. He rode it down, bailing at 5,000 feet over Dutch dunes, evading patrols to link up with the resistance. Claims tallied 5 Germans for 2 losses, a reversal from April's math. As they wheeled for home, fuel gauges flickering red, Blakesley keyed the group Freck. "That's how we do it. Press the advantage." Debriefs at Debden stretched into the small hours, blackboards scrawled with vectors and velocities. "They adapted faster than us last month," Blakesley conceded, circling a diagram. "But we're learning their tells, the high yo-yo, the overshoot." Modifications rolled in from the States. The P-47D's paddle blade props, wider for better bite, arrived in crates stamped urgent. Ground crews swapped them overnight, the new blades chopping air with renewed fury, shaving climb times by 200 feet per minute. Armorers tuned the guns, harmonizing convergence to 200 yards for tighter patterns. "Feels like she woke up," McLaughlin said after a test hop, grinning through exhaustion. In France, Priller absorbed the blow. His JG-26 lost 3 that day, including a promising sergeant. "The Yanks are blooding themselves," he told Herman over schnapps in the officers' mess. "The chateau's tapestries moth-eaten witnesses, but their factories spit Jugs like rabbits. We need numbers, not just skill." Reports to Berlin painted a grim canvas. Allied escorts pushing deeper, bombers unmolested. Göring raged in replies, demanding total commitment, but fuel allotments shrank, mechanics cannibalizing wrecks for parts. As June loomed, Blakesley's men hardened, scars fading into resolve, doubts forged into doctrine. The Jug, once a punchline, now whispered promises in its rumble, of skies reclaimed, of eagles grounded. Yet the war's tide tugged both ways. The real hammer blows waited in the summer haze, where adaptation would clash with innovation, and bloodied wings would paint the dawn. June 1943 scorched the runways of Debden with unseasonal heat, turning the tarmac into a skillet and the cockpits into ovens. Major Don Blakesley wiped sweat from his brow as he strapped into Hop-Along, the P-47D's new bubble canopy framing a view unobscured by the old razorback spine. The upgrades had arrived like manna, paddle blade props that bit deeper into the air, external drop tanks slinging 200 gallons under the wings, and refined turbos that tamed the beast's wild surges. The 4th Fighter Group had blooded itself through maze skirmishes, claims edging losses. But the real test? Brewed over the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heart, now a cauldron of steel and fire under Allied hammers. Blakesley's briefings grew terse, maps unrolled like battle plans from antiquity. "We're going deep this time," he told the squadron. "Red pencil tracing arcs from England to the Rhine. Escort the heavies to Schweinfurt, then strafe what we can on the way out." The 8th Air Force's big wings, B-17s and B-24s by the hundred, demanded cover, and the Jugs were stepping up. No more timid channel hops. These were penetration strikes, 500 miles round trip, flirting with the Luftwaffe's lair. Pilots nodded, faces etched with the wear of endless alerts, but eyes alight. The Jug was awakening, its growl no longer a bluff. The mission launched at dawn on June 14th, vapor trails feathering the sky as 48 P-47s from the 4th and 78th Groups thundered off the decks. Blakesley flew top cover at 28,000 feet. The turbos hum a steady pulse in his ears. Below, the bombers droned in precise boxes, silver specks against the low country's haze. "Tally bandits, 11 o'clock high," crackled Lieutenant Botchke's voice at 10:30 hours, as 30-plus FW-190s and BF-109s materialized from the morning sun. JG-26 and JG-1, Priller's wolves and their northern kin, struck like lightning, diving through the escort screens, cannons winking. Chaos bloomed over the Zuiderzee. Blakesley hauled back on the stick, the Jug's nose rising sluggishly but inexorably, its altitude edge asserting itself. A 190 flashed past his wingtip, rounds stitching the air. He rolled inverted, scanning for the tail. "Break starboard!" he barked as Captain McLaughlin's guns chattered, claiming a probable on a 109 that smoked and veered. The Germans adapted mid-fight, their high-energy tactics forcing the Jugs into defensive orbits, but the P-47's durability shone. A burst from an 190's 30mm chewed McLaughlin's wing root, aluminum folding like foil, yet the plane held, the self-sealing tanks unbreached. McLaughlin limped it home later, belly landing at a forward strip. Blakesley locked onto an FW-190 low on the deck, the enemy pilot, perhaps Wally Mattoni, jinking to shake the pursuit. The Jug dove, shedding speed in a power glide that hit 450 Morder, props screaming. At 300 yards, Blakesley triggered. The 850s erupted, a gale of brass chutes filling the cockpit, the recoil buffeting the frame. Tracers converged in a lethal cone, raking the 190 from prop to tail. The German's canopy flew off, the plane erupting in a fireball that lit the dunes below. "Confirmed kill," Blakesley reported coolly, banking away as flak from Dutch batteries clawed the sky. The melee cost the Allies 4 bombers and 2 fighters, but the Luftwaffe reeled, 8 claimed, including 3 for the 4th Group. As the formation turned for home, drop tanks jettisoned like shedskins. Blakesley keyed the channel. "We owned that sky, boys. Press harder next time." Debriefs buzzed with tactics. The Jug's roll rate, improved by aileron tweaks, let pilots snap into firing positions. Its dive brakes, simple spoilers, prevented overspeeds in pursuits. But vulnerabilities gnawed. Low-level turns still bled energy, inviting bounces from nimbler foes. In Beauvais, Priller slammed a fist on the oak table, loss reports scattering like leaves. JG-26 had tangled with 20 Jugs, downing 2 but losing 5. A ledger turning red. "They're not climbing with us anymore," he growled to Hermann, now back in the saddle with a scarred bird. "But in the dive they're monsters. And those guns, it's like fighting a hornet's nest." Intelligence briefs dissected the P-47D. The bubble canopies all around view, the wet-wing tanks integral to the structure for 800-mile ferries. Priller adjusted. Force the fight low, where their weight anchors them. Use the 190's legs to extend and fade. Yet morale frayed. Pilots whispered of endless sorties, mechanics patching airframes with scavenged rivets. Summer deepened the grind. July's big week, Allied hammer blows on Messerschmitt plants, saw the Jugs in their element. On the 25th, Blakesley led a ramrod to Regensburg, 60 P-47s weaving through 100-plus interceptors. The sky became a slaughter pen. 109s swarming like midges, Jugs carving swathes with sustained bursts. Botchke bagged 2 that day, his 50s sinking to punch through canopies at 400 yards. Losses mounted, 6 Jugs to 14 claims. But the bombers pressed home, factories gutted. "We're the shield now," Blakesley told reporters later, his face gaunt under the newsreels. the fourth group's aces emerged. Pierce McKinnon with 4, Neil Kirby brewing runs in the Pacific Theater. Kartveli, stateside, devoured combat reports like scripture. Telegrams from the ETO detailed hits absorbed, over 100 rounds in one Jug's engine, yet it flew on. He iterated, the P-47M, a -40 variant with a 2,800 HP R-2857, clipped wings for tighter rolls. Production surged. 15,000 airframes by war's end, outstripping Luftwaffe output threefold. The Reich builds aces, Kartveli noted in a memo. We build avalanches. By August, the tide crested. Operation Tidal Wave's Plosti raid pulled P-47s south, but in the west, sweeps over France honed ground attack roles. Blakesley's squadron pioneered rodeo missions, fighter sweeps sans bombers, luring the Luftwaffe to battle. On the 17th, over Rouen, 32 Jugs met JG-2's 1-9s in a furball that raged for 20 minutes. The P-47's bombs, 500-pounders underwing, turned it into a dive-bomber hybrid, shattering rail yards before the dogfight. McLaughlin strafed a flak tower, 50s chewing concrete. In turn, he evaded a 190's snapshot by flooring it into a 500 Mephifor dive. Priller's adaptations buckled under volume. JG-26 flew 200 sorties that month, fuel scraped from barrels, pilots rotating like ghosts. A raid on his field caught 3 190s taxiing, Jug's guns hosing them to scrap. We're bleeding out, Priller confessed in a letter to Goering, intercepted later by codebreakers. The Reichsmarshal's replies rang hollow. Fanaticism will prevail. But the math lied not. Allied production drowned German finesse. As September fogs rolled in, Blakesley gathered his flyers under the hangar eaves. D-Day's coming, he said, voice low. The Jugs will pave the beaches. The plane, once mocked, now thrummed with purpose, a thunderhead gathering force. Across the channel, Hermann polished his gun sight, steeling for the storm. The awakening was complete, the reckoning at hand. The night of June 5, 1944, hung heavy over Debden, the air electric with unspoken dread. Major Don Blakesley, promoted to colonel but still flying lead, briefed the 4th Fighter Group in whispers, blackout curtains drawn against prying eyes. Overlord's on. Normandy at 0600 tomorrow, he said, the words landing like stones in still water. The P-47s, now Ds and Ms in olive drab splendor, lined the dispersals. 96 birds fueled and armed, pilots checking parachutes with ritual care. The Jug had evolved into a multi-role colossus, escort, strafer, pathfinder. Its 8 guns slaked with API rounds for armor-piercing bite. Blakesley's plan was audacious. The 4th would fly ahead of the invasion waves, blasting radar sites and gun emplacements along the French coast. No moonlit waits. They'd launch at 0230, navigating by dead reckoning to Utah Beach. Hit hard, stay low, and get out, he instructed, tracing flak belts on the chart. Captain Jack McLaughlin, his wingman through 100 scraps, nodded grimly. The Jerrys will be waiting, Don. Their night fighters prowl like cats. Lieutenant Don Botchke, now an ace with 7 kills, cracked his knuckles. Let 'em come. The Jug's thirsty. Takeoff was a symphony of fury. Engines coughing to life in the gloom. Props windmilling into blue flames before settling to a bellow. Blakesley's big stud, a P-47M with clipped wings and a supercharged heart, lifted first, the group forming up over the channel's inky swell. At 1,000 feet, they skimmed waves whipped by a rising gale, the invasion fleet a forest of shadows on the horizon. Hour -2, the Jug split into flights, diving on Pointe du Hoc's casemates. Blakesley led the charge, throttle to the stops, the altimeter unwinding to 50 feet. Flak erupted, golden pom-poms stitching the night, but the Jug plunged through, 50s and 500-pound bombs thundering into concrete. McLaughlin's burst silenced a coastal battery, shells arcing harmlessly into the sea as gunners fled. Botchkai strafed a searchlight tower, the beam dying in sparks. Losses came swift. 2 Jugs shredded by 88-meter fire, pilots punching out into the surf, rescued by PT boats. But the path cleared. Rangers would scale those cliffs unmolested. As dawn bled pink over Omaha, Blakesley wheeled east, the beachhead a cauldron of tracers and explosions. Eagle flights form up, he radioed. We've got company inbound. The Luftwaffe's response was frantic. A patchwork of squadrons scraped from the Eastern Front and training fields. JG-2's 109s, led by a Green Hauptmann, bounced the Jugs from Cherbourg, but experience told. Blakesley anticipated the dive, climbing to 15,000 where the turbo reigned. Bandits at 10 high! The melee swirled over Carrington, P-47s rolling into the sun to reverse the rolls. Blakesley claimed his 9th, a 109 that disintegrated under a 3-second burst, debris peppering his windscreen. The Jug's convergence shone. At 250 yards, the 50s wove a net no evasion pierced. In the Reich's command bunkers, Major Priller, promoted and harried, watched the reports flood in with mounting horror. The invasion's a feint? No, it's everywhere! His JG-26, down to 40 flyable 190s, scrambled from bases cratered by preliminary raids. Priller took to the air himself that D-Day morn, his Wurger slicing low over Sword Beach. He spotted Yanks, P-51s mostly, but Jugs too, strafing convoys. Diving like a stooping hawk, he raked a P-47's belly, rounds sparking off armor. The American jinked, returning fire that holed his canopy. Priller broke off, heart pounding. These beasts don't die easy. He radioed his wing, tallying a damaged but no kill. Oberleutnant Ralph Herman, veteran of the Eastern Meat Grinder, flew with renewed fire. Assigned to coastal defense, his 190 tangled with 4th Group birds over Juneau. A P-47, perhaps Bochke's, latched onto his tail, guns blazing. Herman rolled left, the Jug overshooting in the turn, its bulk a liability at treetop height. He countered with a snap roll, cannons barking. Hits marched up the wing. The American's engine trailed oil, but the bird pressed, 50s chewing Herman's aileron. Both disengaged smoking, mutual probables in the fog of war. The Yanks fight like devils, Herman debriefed later, his plane a sieve. By midday, the Jugs owned the beachhead skies. Blakesley's group flew 4 sorties, dropping 20 tons of bombs, claiming 12 kills for 3 losses. Ground crews at forward strips, rough-hewn from Norman pastures, swapped engines mid-invasion, mechanics dodging shellfire. The P-47's field resilience paid dividends. Wings interchangeable, radials rebuildable with stateside parts airdropped in. McLaughlin, nursing a flak-shredded tail, quipped over tea from a jerry can. She's uglier than ever, but she'll win this. Normandy's Bocage War ground on, the Jugs transitioning to close air support. In July's Operation Cobra, Blakesley led Thunderbolts, low-level armor busters, rolling up German lines near St. Lo. 8 500-pounders per plane, fused for delay, cratered roads and brewed panzers. Flak was murder, 40 minutes from half-tracks, 88s from hidden copses. One flight lost half its number to an ambuscade, pilots walking back through hedgerows, chomping captured schnapps. Yet Cobra broke the front. Patton's tanks surged, the Jugs their iron vanguard. Aces proliferated. Robert S. Johnson of the 56th Group, the man from Venus, racked 27 kills, his P-47 absorbing 200 hits in a single Schweinfurt duel. Engine shot, controls severed, yet he glided it home. The Jug's my second skin, Johnson wrote in his memoir. Kartveli's design philosophy vindicated. Quantity of fire over precision. Endurance over elegance. Luftwaffe tallies plummeted, JG-26 down 70% by August. Priller reduced to ground-pounding his own frustrations. As Paris liberated in flames, Blakesley reflected in a liberated cafe, Pernod burning his throat. We flew the edge, he told McLaughlin, the channel a distant murmur. The storm had peaked. The Reich's skies darkened. Herman, captured after a forced landing, stared at his interrogators. You're Thunderbolts. They ended us. The Jug's roar echoed in the fall, paving the road to Berlin. Autumn 1944 draped Europe in crimson and gold, but the skies burned with unrelenting fury. Colonel Don Blakesley, now commanding the 4th Fighter Wing from a commandeered French chateau, pored over maps scarred by grease pencil strikes. The P-47 Thunderbolt had become the 8th Air Force's workhorse. 18,000 sorties since D-Day. Bridges snapped, railheads pulverized, Luftwaffe squadrons ghosted to shadows. Yet the war clawed on, the Bulge's bulge testing the Jug's metal in winter's vice. We're not done hammering, Blakesley told his aces, the room thick with Gauloise's smoke and resolve. The Jugs, battle-worn with patched skins and bent props, stood ready on frost-rimed strips. The Ardennes offensive hit like a blitz from hell. December 16th. Panzers roaring through Belgian snow, skies grounded by blizzards. Blakesley's groups, 4th, 56th, 355th, waited out the gales, then unleashed. On the 23rd, as skies cleared, 200 P-47s swarmed the Somme River bridges, bombs walking the ice in geysers. Flak howled from 88s camouflaged in furs. But the Jugs stooped low, 50s hosing gun crews. Captain Jack McLaughlin, silver-haired at 28, led a flight that brewed a king tiger, its turret blooming orange. Armor-piercing for breakfast, he radioed, evading return fire that starred his canopy. Lieutenant Don Bochke, etched by a scar from Normandy flak, claimed his 12th over Malmedy, a FW-190 caught refueling. The dogfight was a throwback. Tight turns in the valleys, the Jug's roll rate matching the 190s at last. Botchkai's burst caught the enemy climbing, wings folding under the onslaught. But the cost mounted. 2 wingmen down to Me-262 jets, the Reich's desperate wonder weapons. The jets screamed at 540 Meyer, untouchable in level flight. But the Jugs adapted. Ambushes at low altitude, where the Arados sweeps faltered. Across the Rhine, Major Josef Priller nursed his dwindling JG-26 from a Bavarian redoubt. The once proud Abbeville boys numbered 12 planes, pilots averaging 100 missions. Priller flew sparingly now, conserving his frame for the endgame, but reports chilled him. Thunderbolts everywhere, from Y-29 strips to liberated fields. Their radials a dirge over the fatherland. They breed like wolves, he wrote in a final log, tallying 68 personal kills against the tide. Oberleutnant Ralph Herman, repatriated after a POW stint, flew one last sweep, downed by a 56th Group Jug over Koblenz, his 190 cartwheeling into the Moselle. "Tell Kartveli, respect," were his last words, radioed in defiance. Alexander Kartveli, back in Farmingdale, watched the teletypes clatter with victory dispatches. The P-47M and N variants, Pacific tuners with water injection for 2800 HP, had exported the Jug's gospel worldwide. 15,760 built, from Alaska to Burma. Aces like Neil Kirby, 22 kills, praised its dive, its guns. Even P-51 pilots envied its tank-busting grit. Yet Kartveli pondered the human toll. 3,000 Jugs lost in Europe. Pilots like Gabreski captured, others eternal in Normandy's soil. "Wars aren't won by machines," he confided to an aide, "but by the men who strap in." Spring 1945 broke the Reich's back. Blakesley's wing spearheaded the push to the Elbe, Jugs ferrying GIs in absurd pogo stick racks, then turning Hunter over Berlin's ruins. On April 16th, the 4th tangled with the last Luftwaffe gasp, Ju-87s and FW-190Ds in a feudal Stuka revival. McLaughlin's guns claimed 3, the sky a confetti of wreckage. VE found the group at Fürstenfeldbruck, hangars lined with captured Me-262s, pilots toasting with liberated cognac. Blakesley, grounded by brass for his frontline zeal, raised a glass. To the Jug, ugly, unbreakable. The Thunderbolt's legacy etched deep. In the Pacific, P-47Ns swept Iwo's skies, escorting B-29s to Tokyo. In Italy, they rooted out Gothic Line holdouts. Post-war, Jugs soldiered in Colombia, Bolivia, surplus steeds for new frontiers. Johnson, the resilient ace, barnstormed air shows in his restored bird, crowds gasping at its roar. "She taught me humility," he'd say. "Power without grace, but grace in the fight." Priller survived, a restaurateur in Bavaria, penning memoirs that grudgingly saluted the foe. "The Americans' barrel flew straight to our hearts." Göring, in Nuremberg's dock, blamed the sky's betrayal, but the truth hummed in archives. The P-47's industrial logic, mass, firepower, staying power, overwhelmed tactical poetry. From mocked milk can to Reaper of Eagles, it shifted the aerial calculus, paving Allied victory. Blakesley retired a brigadier, haunting reunions with tales of April 43's laughter-turned thunder. McLaughlin farmed in Iowa, Botchke taught at West Point. Kartveli, knighted by George's dreams, passed in 1974. Blueprints his epitaph. The Jug slumbers now in museums, Smithsonian halls, Duxford's vaults, its radial silent, but echoes persist. In every fighter's armor, every burst's convergence. In the end, the skies remember, the barrel that flew, the guns that thundered. Whispers of a war where quantity forged quality, and hidden voices roared triumphant.